Is there genuinely a sense of anticipation in India around the Narendra Modi visit, or is this anticipation and hype that is limited only to the Indian community and perhaps to the Indian media who's following him very closely? I spoke to three leading journalists from three news organizations to get a sense of how newsrooms in America were looking at Mr. Narendra Modi, his visit, his speech at the UNGA and the bilaterals that will happen after that. My first stop was at the Wall Street Journal, the newspaper where Mr. Narendra Modi chose to write an op-ed on the day he landed here in New York. So now I'm at the Wall Street Journal, and with me is Bret Stephens. He's the foreign affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And the interesting bit here is that it's the Wall Street Journal where Narendra Modi wrote this interesting piece. I'd just like to hold it up, which is called An Invitation to Make in India. Very well timed.
Yes. We were very pleased to have it.
So what did you make of the piece, Bret?
Well, it's an optimistic message. It's sign that he wants a new way of doing business, a new openness to investment, which wasn't always clear, I think, to Western investors. You can ask the Walmarts of the world about that. During the late tenure of the past Prime Minister, Mr. Singh, it shows a great deal of confidence and also a great deal of seriousness about addressing India's problems from the ground up. He talks about infrastructure, he talks about hygiene, a series of issues that I think may have been somewhat taboo in previous Indian governments are being spoken about quite openly. And I think he has a large imagination about what India's possibilities can be. And all of that is extraordinarily encouraging to us. We are the Wall Street Journal, after all. We believe in free people and free markets. India is the freest country when it comes to free people, certainly the largest democracy, but hasn't always been the freest in terms of markets. And so institutionally, when we hear about market openings, we think that's good for India and it's good for the rest of the world.
There's a if I were to look through this piece, one particular sentence sounded to me like a strong hard sell, where he says the next time you will feel the change even before you, so here he says, in the coming months you will feel the difference even before you begin your travel to India. And this is part, of course, of his strong Make in India pitch, to make India a manufacturing hub. Bret, what do you think are those changes which the international community, and specifically the international investing community, would like to see in India for this reformist push that Modi is putting forward to actually be bought into?
Well, I think the best way of gauging progress is to look at the ease of doing business rankings that are put out annually by the World Bank. I forgot where India ranked last, but that's a fairly good marker. They're somewhat controversial, especially among countries that rank low on the ease of doing business. But what investors like is clarity, simplicity, speed. They don't need endless delays in obtaining licensing requirements, one kind or another. And they want certainty from the government that their investments are going to be good for a very long time. I think countries like Argentina fall into real trouble with international investors because there isn't that sense of security. When you have a relationship as a large business with a country, you're envisioning a relationship that lasts not just for decades, lasts for generations. So what is the certainty that India will be a good place when you come to face those upfront costs of investing?
So are you talking about political stability, or are you talking about other factors, for example, like tax reforms or something more specific?
Tax reform, but above all, regulatory clarity and simplicity, rule of law. I mean, India has had, with the exception of the emergency period, a very stable democracy since its founding in the 1940s, and I don't think that's at all in question. I mean, there are sometimes some areas with political instability, but really I think the issue for many investors is this going to be an easy place to do business? And is corruption going to be a factor? Is there going to be a kind of a Byzantine political process that will need to be seen through? And the countries that manage to make themselves simple, so to speak, I think are the ones that really succeed. You now hear, remarkably, Francois Hollande, the president of France, a country that's really on its heels economically, talking about the need to make France simple. And I would say that I would offer the same advice to Indian policymakers now. Ask yourself, if you were a foreign investor, how would you experience investing in India? And what are the hurdles that you would have to face, and are those really reasonable? So it might be a useful exercise for Indian policymakers, beginning with Mr. Modi, to think, well, if I'm running a large American or European subsidiary of a grocery store chain or whatever, how easy is it for me to invest? How long does it take? Realistically, will it be a legal, clean process? These are serious questions that international businesses have on their mind, and the countries that make it easier end up doing the best.
That's a very interesting point you make, Brett. In your view, with your long experience, is there a sort of honeymoon period that a leader with the kind of mandate that Modi gets to change the perception around the country? Because we were speaking earlier, and you made a point here that Manmohan Singh's second prime ministership was largely a disappointment. I'd like to know from you, when you call it a disappointment, what would the index be on which you say it's probably been a disappointment, and how much time, in your view, does the Modi government have before it cures that perception about India?
Well, without offering a timetable, I would say it's shorter than you think.
Yeah.
Francois Hollande also had a honeymoon when he came to office. It lasted about as long as his first relationship did, which was not very long at all. And that's, by the way, I would say that the honeymoon is shorter when the expectations are greater, precisely because there's a sense that change needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly. Otherwise, nothing sours more quickly than a disappointed expectation. I don't think Mr. Modi should imagine that he has a mandate to rule India, or the BJP has a mandate to rule India for the next 10 years. The very fact that he got a large majority should make him at least suspect that it's perhaps a soft majority, and it has something to do also with the weakness of the opposition party, of the Congress party in the last elections. That won't necessarily last forever, and he should be...
Is that the global perception as well, in your view?
I don't know if there's a global perception one way or the other, but look...
But there's a precedent for this.
Let me say this. I think that for a lot of observers of India, India has been a land of disappointment. Not only in 47 and 48, in the early years with Nehru, but also the disappointments with the Rajiv Gandhi administration. There was a great deal of hope in the 1980s. People were talking about Rajiv Reagan. Didn't quite work out. Then, of course, there was a moment when Singh was finance minister in the early 90s, a sense of reform. Again, 10 years ago, real sense that India was a country on the cusp of possibility. And it's reminiscent of a quip that is sometimes made about Brazil, that Brazil is the land of the future and always will be. Let's hope that shouldn't be said of India, not least because I think 1.2 billion people have been waiting too long for genuine, sustained development that manages to bring, 12 million jobs or so online a year, which is what you need to keep up with population growth.
I think that's very interesting. But tell me, Brett, from the point of view of a strategic relationship with America, this particular visit, how much can Indians and India expect in terms of a breakthrough? I was talking to someone earlier, and Obama and Modi are at two very different stages of their political career. Obama is handling his own internal problems, and he's at the fag end of his presidency. And Modi comes in right now on the back of a big mandate, looking forward. You say you don't look for 10 years, but I can tell you the BJP looks at 10 years as a certainty. how much of a breakthrough can be made in the relationship between India and America? And does that need to be repaired now in this visit and going forward?
India is now a country that has many suitors, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, Xi Jinping made a visit that was widely billed as a very hopeful visit. Of course, I think this is happening at the same time that China is making claims on Indian territory.
Yes.
That may be an issue. Prime Minister Abe in Japan and Mr. Modi had a very successful visit. And there's the issue of the larger relationship with the United States, which has never really lived up to the hopes that the two greatest democracies in the world today should have a closer relationship. The moment for that, in my view, came around 2005, 2006, with the possibility of a civil nuclear agreement between the two countries that never materialized. And I think you would need to do something large like that again to really cement a strategic relationship.
Such as what? Do you have something specific in mind? I mean, I was looking at the recent news about India that made global headlines, and much of it centered around India's opposition to the trade facilitation agreement. Opposition at the WTO, which defends Indian interests beyond all political parties, because there is a consensus in India that you need to have food subsidies. You need to have farm subsidies, and therefore I do not see the possibility of any government, however eager it is to build bridges globally, including the Modi government, changing its position on that. So, will issues like that be a serious hindrance, or do you think they are just pinpricks?
Excuse me. The WTO is a major question because essentially we've had no real large round of trade liberalization for quite some time. Look, there are various ways of building strategic relationships. Civil nuclear cooperation was clearly one of them. Normalizing, if you will, India as a nuclear state was one of them. The relationship with Iran is another issue that I think concerns a lot of people in Washington, and the perception that Iran has too close a tie, or India, I should say, New Delhi has too close a tie to Tehran.
Yes.
Defense relationships are also quite significant, and that has been in the news in the Wall Street Journal with allegations of bribery scandals connected to the sale of helicopters. So there are a variety of bridges that can be built, and presumably you can build more than one bridge. What I think India needs to do is it needs to make a decision about what it wants to be in the world. And I suspect that for many decades, India has seen itself as sort of a pole apart from the United States in terms of its relationship with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, its leadership in the non-aligned movement. India has had, I think, a very uncomfortable relationship with the idea of belonging to a Pax Americana world.
Isn't that the logical thing to be? I mean, why would any country want to mortgage its independent foreign policy, for example? I mean, why would anybody want to be part of Pax Americana any case?
Well, because Pax Americana provides certain global goods that I think can't be provided in any other way for a number of reasons. Collective security, the promise of collective security never really materializes, which is why I'm always mystified by India's quest to gain what seems to me a hollow trophy with a seat at the Security Council at the United Nations. A balance of power world doesn't suit your interests or really anyone's interests particularly well either. What Pax Americana has provided since 1945 is generally speaking, a rules-based world that has increased human prosperity massively, unprecedentedly. And so I don't think that anyone would suggest that Germany or Japan or the English or the Spanish have compromised their sense of freedom or their ambit for action by, in a sense, belonging to this particular world. And I don't think India would either. This is driven, it strikes me, by a kind of ideological reflexes that better belong to the Nehru era of the 1950s than they do to today.
No, we can have a longer debate on that, Brett, because these are certain touchy areas, of course. But it is, I guess, India has charted a course of having an independent foreign policy. And one of the reasons why, Brett, we have had some apprehensions vis-a-vis America, and I don't know how you view it, but one of the reasons we view from the Indian perspective is that America has not been truly completely honest towards also working with India towards achieving the same global goals, especially vis-a-vis terrorism, counter-terrorism efforts. Now, you've spent some time traveling, and for our viewers also, you've been editor of the Jerusalem Post for a period of 3 years. So you'd be very well aware of the concerns on insurgents and terrorist outfits.
I would, by the way, I don't want you to come away with the suggestion or the implication that I don't think that, or that I would argue that American behavior has been exemplary in all respects, not the least of which has been a kind of realpolitik relationship with Pakistan that has yielded generally bitter results for India, for the United States, and actually, let's be frank, for the Pakistanis as well.
No, I have no such. No. Please don't get me wrong. You have your independent perspective, and you have your right to do that. My question to you was that, if I just throw back to what I'd asked you earlier, can we have a stronger strategic relationship? And the basis of that strategic relationship, Brett, would have to be a certain amount of trust. A view among several commentators in India is that if India and America worked closer together to tackle problems originating from Pakistan, then there is that sort of vested interest on both sides to bring the relationship closer together. Do you think that can happen on the eve of America's withdrawal from Afghanistan? Do you think there's a greater possibility of that happening today than, say, if we were having this conversation 3 or 4 years back?
That's a very adept and insightful question. I think our ability to exert influence in not just Afghanistan but vis-a-vis Pakistan and the jihadis who reside in Pakistan diminishes dramatically in the wake of U.S. withdrawal. We will simply be a less consequential player in that region, particularly if Pakistan then feels it can expand into its backyard, as they see it, into Helmand and other areas of Afghanistan. So one of the many reasons why I have opposed U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is our diminished ability to influence behavior in the region, and not just when it comes to the Taliban or small groups, but also influence the behavior in the course of the Pakistani government.
So, Brett, finally, what's your overview on Modi? What's the perspective you get? Is there some optimism about him? We spoke about the honeymoon period earlier, of course, but what's the broad overview you have?
That he's dynamic and disciplined, that he's a change of pace, that he represents the possibility that India is again going to be a serious player economically after a few bad years, and a serious player strategically. And I think that is exciting for a lot of Americans, the sense that you have a real leader in India with a mandate, with a moment, with an opportunity. That doesn't come around all that often. And so I do think that Americans are taking a look at India and the Indian government in a new way. You might say that in the last 2 or 3 years, India had slightly been written off after a kind of a period of excitement and ebullience. India is being looked at again, and I think that's an opportunity that this government ought to seize. It doesn't last forever. You know, Napoleon, there's a story that Napoleon's mother was once asked, what did she think of her son's victories? And she replied, "Pourvu que ça dure," for as long as it lasts. Well, it's, I hope it lasts for a long time. We wish him well.
I think he's a pragmatist, and he wouldn't expect that the honeymoon would last forever. Let's see how quickly he moves. Brett, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome to the Journal.
Thank you.